Hello, friends. Welcome back to Trending. Today's Thursday, November 14th at about 9:20 as we're starting. Good morning, Joe.
How's it going?
Doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing fine. You know, that Olympique Lyon's
Yes.
warm-up jacket looks good on you, man.
Thank you. This is one of my favorite things I got from France.
You were born to wear that.
I love it. Feel tied to my French peeps whenever I wear this.
It's a bonjour.
Yes, bonjour, bonjour. All right, Joe. So here, I feel like for a while now, you and I are gonna be in a little bit of a pickle.
Okay.
Because this whole thing is about taking something from the news, current events, and taking our faith perspective on it, right? Yeah. And we do our best not to get into politics. And for a while, the news is going to be politics. For a while, like it's going to be what people are talking about and what's. I looked at Twitter last night, and all of the trending topics were all political things, right? So that's where we're going to be for a while.
Okay.
So I think every once in a while we'll try to take something that's happening in that world and we'll try to pull something out of it, but we're not going to try to harp on any policy necessarily or bash on any candidates. That's not what we're here to do.
Right.
But what can we learn from a cultural perspective of it, right? So
yeah.
Today's a good example of that. I think we have a good discussion ready it's political adjacent, but it's not political in nature.
You're going to thread the needle.
I'm going to do my best.
Yes.
I'm going to try to put politics, basketball, and the Bible in one thing.
Oh my, here we go.
Here we go. Let's see if we can do it.
All right.
So this week, the big news is Trump's working on picking out his potential cabinet, right? So he's getting the appointees, and they'll go through that whole process. And so last few days, that's what everybody's been talking about, is he's been leaking those out. And I guess probably wherever you land politically, I think you'd at least admit they're interesting choices. It's newsworthy and interesting, the people he's choosing. Yeah. And okay, so let's put that there for just a minute.
Okay.
So we've got the political candidates and the cabinet positions. This week also, again, this also is not a sports show, but a little sports thing.
Right.
Tuesday night.
Yeah.
There's a big NBA game where Steph Curry, for the first time, played against Klay Thompson.
Right.
They're both on the Warriors for many years.
Splash Brothers.
They won, I think, 4 championships together.
Yes.
Both kind of at the top of the league, and especially in three-point shooting, but just great players. Klay got traded to the Mavericks, and so it was the first time they played against each other in San Francisco on Tuesday. And so they had a big welcome home Klay party. There's some kind of cool things that happen with that. So, okay, I thought we could kind of talk about teams. And more specifically, when you're building a team,
yes,
what should you be looking for?
Okay.
So Klay and Steph, I think, are interesting because they're both, if you look at them, their games are pretty similar. Mm-hmm. They're built kind of similar. They're both like crazy good three-point shooters. So a lot of people wouldn't necessarily want 2 of those on your starting lineup. You might want a more balanced lineup, some people might say.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting that they have that. Trump's cabinet is shaping up to be kind of interesting because it's actually pretty diverse racially, and he's got both men and women on his appointees so far. But it's not very ideologically diverse. They're all very similar on their beliefs, but at least racially and both genders are represented. So if you were to build a team, Joe, what would be your magic ratio of, okay, I want this group to be pretty similar in some regards, or is it important to have diversity? If you were to build your dream team, Joe?
Oh my gosh.
How do you? Because I think that's kind of a hard thing. Like if you're hiring a team, or if you're building a group at church or whatever, we kind of want to have people that we agree with, but we also, I think, recognize diversity is important. So
right.
How would you balance that?
I mean, team dynamics, team psychology. A great field study. I don't know if there's a consensus on it, because I think I don't know. Ocean's 11. Those movies are, of course, it's Hollywood. So how much can you really, take that to the bank? But I just think it's interesting how all these oddballs and like Ocean's 11 are put together, but they all have that one key thing that's necessary for the mission at hand. And so that's one way you can think about a team. Maybe if your task is kind of short term, then you just kind of go out and get those who can do a certain task. You want to build something for like the long term, right?
Yeah.
You probably have to have people who have values of cooperation, who are flexible, who are humble, who don't have to be, the prominent person on the team in order to kind of have like longevity. I think that was the secret sauce for the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah.
I think they also changed the game of basketball. I mean, like it or not, the 3-point game, we could probably chart this. The average 3-point attempts before and after the Golden State Warriors golden era, is drastically different. I mean, now you have bigs, okay, like tall guys who play near the basketball hoop. They are now shooting. You have to like be able to shoot 3-pointers and stuff like that.
7-footers.
That's right. Yeah. Who are pulling up, which would never been heard of. Never. So I think that I think they figured something out where you could have a team full of 3-point shooters.
Yeah.
And win, and not just win inconsistently, but win championships year after year. And so, I think it would all that come back to say, I think it would depend on the objective at hand. I think it's longevity in mind. I think you have to have people who are flexible. I think people who are curious, who they come in with a doctrine. They come in with something they feel like they've figured out. But as the situation changes, as the landscape changes, are they willing to think again?
Yeah.
So I would probably want people who are curious, people who are thoughtful, people who can say they're sorry and extend forgiveness, and then people who are fun at parties, because we're going to be together a long time, man. It would be a drag to like loathe the time together, but also to enjoy one another, where there's just a lot of inside jokes and stuff like that, which is what I kind of saw with our France team. If I could, kind of go full circle here, our team from France, we all kind of had like specific niches in ministry. I think that like underneath it all, people who had fun.
Yeah.
I mean, like our group chat has been kind of dormant for a while, kind of flared up again because of something, and there was just nothing but fun and hilarity, you know, that kind of ensued. And so I just think that was probably like the main feature of our team is people who are humble, people who are flexible, and people who have a good time together. I think that would be probably some of the things that I would pick. So
I think you're right that humility and flexibility for teams is so important. I think we're in such a weird time where more and more is so that our politicians are becoming celebrities, right? So I remember, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I didn't know the name of every single person on the cabinet. Like it just wasn't as newsworthy as it is today. And the people who were in those positions weren't necessarily on TV all the time, and they weren't these kind of spearhead, faces that we see all the time. So I think you're right that flexibility and humility are things that are great for teams, but we don't see that in politics, honestly, from either side very, very often.
Right.
So I would say the people who are currently in the news aren't known for their humility or flexibility, right?
Yeah.
But going back to the Warriors, those three, so Steph and Klay, and if we throw Draymond Green in there, they're kind of big personalities, they're big stars, but they share the ball in interviews. They're really quick to prop each other up and say, hey, there's an interview with Draymond a couple nights ago that said, hey, Klay was just as responsible for our success as Steph Curry was. And so how can that be? How come in some parts of our world think and flexibility are elevated and rewarded, and in some ways it just seems like it's not even realistic for us to ask that of people?
Yeah, I think the nature of the game of politics is power, and I think when you have power, you don't want to relinquish it. Yeah, and so I think that's why like humility could be a sign of weakness in some political spaces. Yeah. Because that just doesn't win elections. Doesn't you need to own the other side. That seems to be the name of the game. And so there seems to be a decent part of our society that doesn't want humble leaders in that sector because they need people who can throw down, people who don't settle scores, or if they settle scores, they don't get even. They don't get even. They end them, right? And so I just think that might be just the nature of that sector of society. But I think in regards to sports figures, I think that the young, impressionable minds of our society, they look up to athletes more than they do politicians. True. I mean, even in my day, like it was odd. There was this one girl in my 6th grade class who she was like into politics, and we still liked her as a friend, but like we couldn't have fun around her because she was always bringing up stuff that was kind of hard to talk about, and she would have these hot takes all the time. And that's when we're going, that would be an exhausting life, right? Yeah. But I think that athletes are different because they're playing a game, and they're on funny commercials. Yeah. And they tend to be more gregarious in their personality. And I'm the first to admit, like I think Steph has grown on me. I was not a Steph Curry fan initially. Okay. I mean, I admired him at Davidson because he took this little college and put them on his back, and like nearly beat KU in one NCAA tournament, right? Crazy good. But then when he got into the league, he had a chip on his shoulder. And I think it was rightfully so, because people dogged on him in recruitment and stuff like that, and their analysis of his ability to be a pro, and he proved them wrong. Yeah. I remember there was a couple series back to back because we've always been LeBron James fans, and so like they beat the Cavs, or no, they beat the Heat.
Yeah.
Right. And then the Cavs come back into beating them. I remember there's an iconic moment where like LeBron like rejected Steph at the rim, and he kind of like gave him a mean mug. I think it's the year that Steph may won MVP, and LeBron's like, yeah, MVP what, you know? But I'm telling you, like, he's grown on me because he's become more self-effacing. He has been just more gregarious in his personality.
Yeah.
He's not showing up people with, celebrations and stuff. He's more enjoyable.
Yeah.
And I think that we've got to give people a chance to grow on us. I think athletes do more than politicians.
Yeah.
And I think it's because they've learned how to be self-effacing. I think Steph and Klay and Draymond, even though I don't know if Draymond's really growing on people.
No,
I think he's still
not.
the same guy,
he's
right?
The villain. He's embracing the villain role.
Maybe, and he loves to play that part. But I think that Steph and Klay, for sure, have learned how to dwell together.
Yeah.
And that's an enduring quality of both of them.
Definitely.
So, and I think you kind of saw that whenever the Mavs and the Warriors played.
Yeah.
Klay is on a different team now. But how cool was it that a whole section of fans wore like the captain's hat because, I don't know, after they won a world championship, he was like, wearing
Captain.
that he was the captain during their parade and stuff like that. And I thought that was cool that they didn't feel like he abandoned them or that he was a traitor.
Yeah.
They still honored him for the time that he was there. I think you see that in sports a whole lot more than in other spaces, right? I don't know.
Agreed. Yeah. Totally agreed. Okay, we need to wrap in some Bible.
Oh, yeah.
So speaking of building a team and people who are similar and people who are diverse, I think the disciples are a perfect example of this. And you'll know way more than I do, so I'd like to just toss this at you. But I think the disciples are interesting because there's a handful that we know a lot about. And then there's these guys that are like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot that dude was even here.
Yeah.
Right? So I think they're kind of an example of some of them had a lot in common and some of them were kind of oddballs that didn't really fit the mold of what a Jesus disciple might look like. So
Right.
how can we roll the disciples into this conversation? What would you add?
Yeah, so we got some biblical content about the disciples, and only a few of them get cameoed. The rest of them is just kind of like a one phrase. Kind of reminds me when I was in A Midsummer Night's Dream at Sterling.
Nice. Yeah,
I had
yeah.
like 3 lines.
Nice.
Still part of the play, but it was
Yep.
just 3 lines. I was easily forgettable.
Nice.
Right? But no, and then we've got some tradition about what happened to them, and that may or may not really correlate with history, but we have these stories. It's kind of interesting how the chosen is just so embraced and loved, and the writers of Chosen have this artistic license to maybe fill in some of the gaps of who the disciples were. But we do have a brief outline of them in all the Gospels, or at least in the Synoptics, where they're listed together. And that list actually gives us a lot of information.
Okay.
We have some folks who are zealots. The zealotry wasn't an official political party, but it was certainly a posture. At the time of Jesus, it becomes an official political movement in the 60s of the first century as the war with Rome begins to really get to its fever pitch in the late 60s, early 70s. First century AD. And then you've got a tax collector thrown in there who was a surrogate of Rome. Yeah. And so it's like Jesus, I understand that, Galilee is not a hugely populous place. And there may have been a certain type of people there. But you could have been, some people would critique Jesus and say, you could be a bit more selective and get some more people who thought the same.
Yeah.
But to have a tax collector and a zealot in a team together could have been a disaster because they were diametrically opposed to one another, and they would have argued and bantered about there would have been a point of order all the time. But Jesus looks at them, he's like, I will make it work.
Yeah.
Grace will be extended.
Yeah.
We'll make it work. And I don't think it was easy in the band of disciples. There probably was arguments all the time. We do see jockeying of position about who is going to be first in the kingdom, who's going to sit next to you, in the new age to come. And Jesus has to sort all that out. He has to tell them again and again about humility, about taking up your cross and being a servant and not being served. He's got to give that speech all the time.
Yeah.
But Jesus is at least attempting to put different people together. And we see this. There's a great book out there. I would highly recommend it by Scott McKnight called A Fellowship of Difference. He talks about how the church from the very beginning was a diverse group of people. Yeah. And N.T. Wright has said, the church has always tried to have unity and holiness at the same time. How can we include as many people as possible but stay holy to God in our one calling to be, this one unique people of God in the image of Jesus. And he's got this cool metaphor in the book where he's like, if you make a salad, you don't, keep the tomatoes in one spot and keep like the cheese in one spot. And like you mix it all together. That's what you bring in all the flavors of all of it. So, and that's what makes a salad. He's like, in the same way, in the church, it needs to be this great fellowship of difference where we still are brothers and sisters in Christ and still retain our uniqueness as people. And that is the hardest thing to try to do, even in an age like ours, even after 20 centuries of trying to do this thing. But it seems to be an admonition we see again and again. And it really is the heart of the book of Romans, like in the most famous letter of Paul, Romans 15:7, receive one another, accept one another, because it brings praise to God, right? And I think hopefully that we'll take on that task fresh and new in a generation like ours.
And that's really good. Okay, we can start to wrap up here. So I think everyone would agree, humility, ability to change your mind, be curious, those are things we talk about all the time. So being a good team player, I think you're definitely, those things are crucial. Do you have any other takeaways? How else can we be good team players in our day-to-day life? Anything else you want to add to that?
This would be weird, but like give everybody a nickname, man. I think when nicknames are like flying around, that's some good stuff. That's kind of like a sign of we're getting to know one another, and we can have banter, but we're also there for one another. And I thought, like, what's the best nickname you've ever been given? I don't like do people just call you Airsman? I don't know. Like,
I've never really had one that's stuck really.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we should have the trending audience to give you a nickname. Yes.
Well, I feel like skills where you skill. What other
skills sometimes? So in the hockey world, many nicknames end with like a Y. So Skilly. Skilly.
Right. Nice.
And that's what I call my kids. I would call them, "Hey, Skillies, you ready to go?" So, anyways,
Well, it's just humor and levity, right? I think that's humor, levity, curiosity, humility.
Yes.
It's what we always come back to.
Yes.
Those are the kind of people we want to be.
And assuming the best out of people, because people will let us down. They absolutely will. And we have to manage our expectations. That's people. But I think a key feature of friendship and maybe a good team is, can you learn to settle and to move on? And that's the biblical definition of peace. We've surely talked about before. But the Greek word for peace is eirene. Root word is the verb eiro, which means to join together. Now, peace is not the absence of a conflict, but it's the evidence that something was there. There's like a scar, but it's been repaired, and we're going to continue to move on. We don't have the file books of all the offenses that someone's had against us, but we've tried to settle. We still see value and worth within them, and we keep on moving. And I think that's probably a critical trait and habit of a good team is when conflict happens, we don't run. We actually try to work it out the best we can and live to tell of it. And I think, and so we become people of grace and mercy, which then bears witness to Jesus, who we claim is the very center of who we are and our community. We're a Christ-centered community. And with that is going to come redemption and forgiveness and grace and hope. So
it's good. And as our politics continue to get crazier and crazier, I'm more and more motivated just to work on myself to be a better and better person. If we just all become better people, we don't need as government as much, right? So that's kind of what I'm currently thinking about.
And maybe
those people this week.
Maybe in the marketplace of ideas, the most gracious group wins. The most forgiving group wins. The calmest group wins. People who are the least nasty wins. I'm gonna work with that, and I want to be a part of that team. So it means I got to better myself in order to get there. So
it's a big house with lots of room.
Oh, somebody preached a sermon on that a couple weeks ago.
Palouse, right? Got to be Palouse. All right, let's wrap it there. Thank you guys. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.